All right, Kathy's. I kicked those other two bums out for this episode because it was going to be a highly intelligent talk. We have a very special guest today, Bradley Tusk, who just released a TED Talk a few weeks ago around mobile voting, and really fascinating topic. And Bradley has an incredible background that we'll also get into. And then he's going to sit and talk some news with me. So I'm excited to have him. He's calling in from New York City. And we were just talking about that he would consider, doing winter in LA, which is not normal behavior for a New Yorker. Most New Yorkers hate LA.
Yeah. I mean, you know what, though? It's like, it's out of some, it's sort of, I'm a Mets fan, right? And okay. I hate the Yankees. Why? Because I'm petty and vindictive, right? The Yankees have won, I don't know, 28 World Series, something like that. The Mets have won one in my lifetime. Yeah. And so as a result, I want them to fail. Yankee fans don't care at all about the Mets because, like, what's the difference, right? Yeah. So in a weird way, New Yorkers were complaining about LA. It's like, well, let's see. They've got great weather year round. People live often in houses that are much bigger than sort of Manhattan apartments. Everyone seems kind of happy, and therefore I need to shit all over it. And that's, that might be human nature, but I'm a little more intellectually honest, and I'm like, it looks fucking great to me. So I like LA. I like it whenever I'm there. And I was mentioned before, my youngest is going into 11th grade. So once he hits college in a couple of years, I have no need to be in New York in the winter.
That's amazing. Well, what's really interesting is you've had a pretty insane career, and it all started in politics. And we've had this podcast for 8-9 years, and politics is an extremely divisive topic on this podcast. Really because over the last few years, my brother went more left and I became more right. And so now my brother and I fight. And so it drives people crazy, specifically him and my mom. But
it makes for good content.
It's unbelievable content. And I'm so fascinated because you have been, starting your career in politics and then seeing what it's at today. I don't know if it's different and we're just realizing it's always been like this, or you're seeing it and be like, oh no, it's way different than it was when I first started.
It's both, right? So some of it is sort of underlying human nature of politicians. And not only is it not that different than when I started this, 30 something years ago, my guess is that the Greek Senate and the Roman Senate were similar in some ways too, because, people, it's only evolution takes place over millions of years. And, we're only talking a couple of thousand years that there's been some sort of democracy. However, with that said, if you told me when I started working in politics in the 90s that this thing called the internet would exist, because that was just barely even started yet, and social media would exist, and I knew who Donald Trump was because I grew up in New York, but that he would be the president and all of these things would happen, I would never have believed it.
Yeah. And I think the more, I was in the 90s, I was middle school, getting into high school, and I was obsessed with history, and I got super obsessed with politics. And I got really, when Clinton got elected, I was very much glued to CNN and reading the papers and learning all about, what would happen in that election.
So you were a really cool, popular kid like I was.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I have a very, very vivid memory of me coming back from New York from summer vacation, first day of school. And I was so excited because I got to walk the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I wore a New York Stock Exchange polo to school and got obliterated.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm surprised you came home in one piece.
Yeah. Literally, everyone's look at this fucking dork wearing an NYS. And no one even knew what NYSC meant or what it was. But it
was clearly uncool, whatever it was. Yeah. It's funny. Have you been to the stock exchange lately, by any chance?
I have not been since that era. Basically scarred me.
You're so scarred by it. There's no way. You have PTSD. Right. You should be having convulsions. So it's just, they don't trade there, obviously, because it's all electronic. So it's just a TV set. right? I go down there sometimes to do TV hits, but it's just a bunch of like individual, stations sort of set up with their little, booth.
So traders don't even have to go there anymore. If you have a seat on the exchange, you don't have to operate there.
People there's no one in finance there. It's all people in media.
Yeah, it's just Jim Cramer screaming.
Yeah, exactly.
And so how did you enter your career in politics? Because I think that's important to...
I have a story. You have time for it? It's like a 2-minute story.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Bill Clinton. So in 1992, the Democratic convention was held at Madison Square Garden. You might remember that. Yeah. And I was 18 at the time. And, I'm a first generation American. We didn't know anybody, we were just very regular people, but I was interested in politics. And my dad had a friend who was a lawyer for the Carpenters Union. And this guy, Brian O'Dwyer, knew I liked politics. And he said, I can get you a 1-day Carpenters pass to the convention. Would you like to go? And I said, sure, that'd be great. So I get the pass. And when you look in the newspaper still existed back then. It said convention noon to midnight. Now that I've been to a bunch of these, I know it's like 8 to 11 in reality, but I didn't know that. So I show up at the Garden at noon, right? And there's nobody there, right? Like 2 dudes running for state rep in Montana, and that's it. But a guy named Ed Rendell was the mayor of Philadelphia at the time. I just finished my freshman year at Penn, and he was sitting in the audience by himself. And I was like, you know what? He's the mayor of Philly. I go to school in Philly. I'll say hello. What's the worst that could happen? And knowing Rendell now, he was just chatting with the empty seat until someone showed up anyway. So he was happy to have an audience. So we talked for like 10, 15 minutes. And I kind of realized I've used enough of his time. So I say, thank you. And he says, are you busy? You're back to school? I said, not particularly. He said, do you want an internship? I said, that'd be great. He said, okay, send me a note. We'll set it up. So I go home. I write a letter. And every day I'm checking the mailbox and there's nothing there. And what I didn't know then, but I know now, is correspondence is the black hole of government, right? Everything goes in, nothing comes out. So never hear back. I get back to school, and for some reason, I decide I'll go see him. And it was about a decade before 9/11, so security wasn't what it is today. And I get to not his secretary, but like the outer office. And I said, is the mayor here? And they kind of stopped for a second, because if you think about it, it's a crazy question to ask, right?
Yeah. It's a big city, yeah.
Yeah. So and having now worked at we'll go through it, but a bunch of different government offices where I've kind of walked by the outer office on the way to my office, when something like that happens, it's one of two things. The person is genuinely crazy, or they're protesting. I wasn't protesting. I clearly wasn't crazy. I was just this gullible, nice, naive kid, right?
Yeah.
And so these old Italian ladies who were man of the desk kind of felt bad for me. And they're like, oh, he's busy, but do you want to leave a note? I'm like, okay, great. So I write a note. I get back on the subway to go back to the dorm. And it kind of hits me on the subway like, you fucking idiot. You can't just go see the mayor. I'm like, all right, forget it. Never going to happen. Next thing. And I get back in the dorm room, and about 10 minutes later, the phone rings, and I answer, and they say, please hold for the mayor. He said, when are you coming to work? And I said, I'll be there in 20 minutes. And then I worked for him all through college, and that's how I got started in politics.
Oh my God, that's crazy.
Yeah.
What's interesting is I don't even know if that can happen today. Do people have the wherewithal to let a stranger into their...
I don't think the security. Yeah. I mean, I think it would be hard to even get close, because security today is just totally different. Now, I have not been in City Hall in Philadelphia in a long time, so maybe it's a little different. But when I think about New York City Hall, because I worked there.
Forget it.
No way. Yeah. You're not even getting in the building.
Yeah. So what would you do right after college then?
So I became the spokesman for the New York City Parks Department. Wow. Which was in some ways the most fun job I've ever had, because there's 28,000 acres of parkland in New York City, over 2,000 parks, and interesting or weird shit happens in them all day, every day. And it was my job to either answer questions about it to the press or promote it to the press. And I worked for this guy named Henry Stern, who was this sort of legendary New York City figure, who was both incredibly brilliant. At one point, he was the youngest Harvard Law School grad ever, but also crazy. And he would do anything for press and attention. And so whatever crazy stunt I came up with, he would do it. So I remember one year on Groundhog Day, we got a groundhog costume. We dug a giant hole in the ground. We buried him. And then when the press came, he popped out. we dressed him as a shepherd once, and he walked sheep across the sheep meadow of Central Park. Like anything, if I told him it'll get you on TV, he would do it. And so it was a crazy couple of years, really fun. And then I went to law school, which was, interesting. I knew I wasn't going to practice law, so I kind of just went to try to learn stuff. And glad I did. A lot of student loans, but I think it was worth it. And then when I finished law school, I really, I went to the career office and I was there. And I said, hey, I don't want to practice law. How can you help me? And they said, we can't. I said, shit. All right. So, and I didn't want to go work in law or a law firm, although my Jewish parents desperately wanted me to. And I probably should have, because I had to take out all the student loans to pay for it. But I was like, I just don't want to do that. I'm not going to like it. So I went back to the parks department, and they let me run like big chunks of the agency. So I did that for a couple of years. And then I got a call saying, hey, Chuck Schumer is looking for a communications director. Would you be interested? And I really wasn't, because I didn't want to work in Washington. I didn't want to work in the legislature. And I felt like, oh, I'm a lawyer now. I'm, above doing press. Yeah. And so, of course, I said yes to the interview. And because I didn't want the job, Chuck desperately wanted me to take it, right? I wanted the job. They were like, screw you. But I was so combination of aloof, but also pretty qualified. Yeah. And eventually talks me into it. And, until Trump came along, the press job for Chuck Schumer was easily the worst job in Washington, D.C., because Chuck is the most press hungry person in at least federal government outside. Again, Trump's in his own situation. And we would have a press conference every single day, including Sunday. And it was both an incredible job and a terrible job, because on one hand, I worked literally around the clock, and almost nothing that we ever announced ever happened because Congress doesn't do anything, right? But any idea I had, he'd be like, okay. So anything, it was kind of like Henry Stern, but instead of dressing up at the groundhog, it was federal legislation to fix car insurance or whatever. And I would just make something up, and then we'd have a press conference announcing it, and then we'd put it in a bill, which would go nowhere. But nonetheless, we got attention every week. And so it was a tough job, because his management style was kind of pitting everyone against each other. So it wasn't a pleasant place to work, but I learned a lot. And then exactly a year into my tenure there, 9/11 happened. Wow. And so then the work did become really meaningful, because our job was to try to get federal money to help New York rebuild, and to just try to, that was a time where the public figures, the leaders were actually important to people. People seeing Rudy, Chuck, whoever on the street, it made them feel better, right? And so that actually got meaningful for a while. And then one of the things that came out of 9/11 was that Mike Bloomberg unexpectedly won and became mayor. And one of my really good friends was one of the people on the campaign. And so after I finished, I promised Chuck 2 years. And as soon as I finished, I went over to City Hall, went to work for Mike. And I got to do something that would have gotten me fired by any other politician, but because he was Mike Bloomberg, it worked, which was, when I got there, Mike in the early days was really unpopular. You kind of forget that now because he ended up being so successful, but he raised property taxes, he closed firehouses. The smoking ban ended up being very popular, but it was not in the beginning, right? People were like, who are you to tell me I can't smoke? And I was like, shit. There's no way to reelect this guy based on his charm and charisma. He doesn't have that much of it. So we got to do something different. And I thought, having gotten to know him a little bit, this guy is beyond being the smartest person around. He is also sort of uniquely kind of competent and transparent and ethical. And so I made a list of every single promise that was made on the 01 campaign. I looked at every transcript, every article, every debate, session, everything possible. And I put together a spreadsheet of about 370 things. And I went to Mike and said, I want to publicly release the status of every single one of these things, no matter where they stand. And any other politician would have fired me on the spot. He was like, do it, which was and I kind of knew he was going to say that, but it was still a little crazy. And then so I started going to all the commissioners. They'd be like, hey, how you doing on these 10 things that he talked about for the Parks Department or the Sanitation Department, whatever it was? And of course, everyone had the same answer, which was, what 10 things? Because no one even told them. And I was like, oh, you got to do this. And I said, and I'm publicly releasing the status of all of this in a couple of months, regardless of where you are, because I actually wasn't worried about the rate of what was done. I wanted to show the transparency of it, and in some ways, the worse, the more transparent it appeared. Now, the commissioners didn't want to look, didn't get their stuff done, so they actually started hustling really fast to do it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do the press conference, not like a typical kind of city hall ceremonial thing. So during the campaign, Mike was campaigning in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. Do you know where that is?
No.
And it's like way out. Remember the movie Moonstruck? You ever see that?
Yes. Yeah.
That's where it took place.
Okay.
Like super Italian, old school Brooklyn. And a guy, Anthony Santamaria, comes up to Mike during the campaign and he says, "You politicians are all the same. You come here when you want our vote and you never come back." And Mike said to him, "I'll tell you what, 7 a.m., the morning after the election, win or lose, I'll meet you right here." Wow. And then now, fast forward, Bloomberg wins, which no one thought was going to happen, right? It was like a huge surprise. I don't think I think they hadn't even got home from the night before yet. And then someone realized like 5 a.m., shit, we got to meet Anthony. And so Mike schleps back out to Bensonhurst. And Anthony's there. But at that point now, he's like the incoming mayor. So NYPD's like circling him. And he had to be like, yeah, no, that guy's okay. And so I called Anthony. I said, "Anthony, you're all about like, transparency and follow up and everything else. I want you to release this thing with Mike." And we did it like at a diner in Bensonhurst. And it was super fun. And Mike ended up doing a campaign promise report every year for the rest of his mayoralty. And I had this great hope that it would start this trend of accountability. Not a single politician ever did it again.
Yeah. People always disappoint.
Totally. But while that was all happening, I'm sitting in the bullpen because Bloomberg, he sat in the middle and we all just had desks in this giant room. And a friend of mine called and said, "Would you like to be the deputy governor of Illinois?" And my questions were, what's a deputy governor and why are you calling me? And the answer was, it's the guy that runs the state. And they were calling me for a couple of reasons. Some I understood at the time, some I didn't figure out till years later. So the new governor was a guy named Rod Blagojevich. I don't know if that name rings a bell.
Yeah. I know he is.
So Rod ended up in jail for a long time.
Yeah.
But Rod was this really fascinating figure, right? So he's this like first generation American, one of the most charismatic people you'd ever meet, right? Like from a retail political standpoint, like when you go to a parade and he'd be like sprinting from side to side, crowd surfing, the gay parade, you'd be like, just don't pose for a photo with a giant dildo. Next thing you know, he's posing for a photo with like the 10-foot dildo or whatever it was, right? He'd go to black church and sing gospel. Like he was incredible.
Yeah. That's amazing.
He also just wasn't totally sane. Like had he pled insanity in his trial, they would have had to have given it to him. The problem is truly crazy people don't think they're crazy, right?
Yeah.
So he thought he was fine. But he had this view of government that his job was to run for office, and it was kind of somebody else's job to then run the government itself. And they needed someone who was really young. I was 29 at the time because he was so difficult to deal with that any adult after 3 weeks would be like, go fuck yourself. And that would have been the end of it. But because I was so young, I was like, I'll kind of put up with anything. And I was, willing to work 80 hours a week. And also in a way, what I learned later was I was naive enough that the things that they were doing that were corrupt, it didn't even occur to me for a while because it was like, I didn't have a life experience to know about it, right? But I got to run the state. So it was all the state's budget, operations, legislation, policy, communications, 60,000 employees, $70 billion budget or something like that. Wow. And I'm 29 and I have no fucking idea what I'm doing, but somebody had to run the state. And so for the next 4 years I did, and it was a crazy experience, but it was really fun. And so I did that for 4 years. And then when Bloomberg ran for actually, when the market crashed and he decided he wanted a third term, I get a call saying, "I need you at City Hall right now." I go down there and they're like, Mike's, I want to do a third term. Go figure out how to convince the city council how to change term limits, overturn them. And so did that. We managed to pass the law by like one vote. And then I ran the campaign to reelect him in 2009. And that was the last sort of job I've ever had kind of inside of politics.
And then you got rich.
Yes, I did. Kind of by accident a little bit. So I started a political consulting firm, and I had like one idea that was kind of novel, which was within this little niche of political consulting, which was you had firms that worked all over the country, but they had one skill set. They would do ads or polling or something that you could do nationally. And you had firms that could run whole campaigns, but they only worked in one place, DC, Sacramento, Boston, whatever. And I was like, I've worked in Illinois, Philly, DC, New York. I didn't know how to do all this stuff. Like, why can't I run full campaigns everywhere? And then as a result, why can't I charge 3 times as much as everyone else? Because I'm doing the whole country. And people started hiring me to do it. And all of a sudden had a bunch of clients and was making money for the first time in my life. I paid off my student loans. And then I got really lucky. I was sitting, Walmart was an early client. I'm sitting in a Walmart meeting, and a buddy of mine called and said, hey, there's a guy with a small transportation startup. He's having some regulatory problems. Would you mind talking to him? I become Uber's first political advisor that day. And then I get even luckier because Travis Kalanick, who was the founder of Uber, calls me back and says, listen, I can't afford your fee. Would you take equity? Now, I didn't even know what equity meant, but thank God I said yes. Yeah. And equity means stock. And that was back during the Series A. So super, super early days.
Wow. Okay.
And then I spent the better part of the next few years running the campaigns all over the US to legalize Uber. And the thing that we figured out that really worked was, at the time, we were just a tiny little tech startup, and taxi was a very powerful industry, and they had lobbyists and campaign contributions and all this stuff. And we didn't have any of that, but people loved our product. Like, think back, like now when you call an Uber, it says 4 minutes, it takes 7 and you're annoyed. But think back to the first few times you used it. It was like magic, right?
Magic, yeah.
Right. So that was at that point, we were like, okay, early off and on, we had enough people into the market, but still pretty early. We would go to them through the app and say, listen, the city, the mayor, whoever's trying to take this away, you won't be able to use it anymore. If you want to keep it, we need you to weigh in. Press here and we'll connect you to your city council member, mayor, or state senator, whoever was the relevant politician. And millions of people did. And we won in every single market in America. And the reason why is actually pretty simple, which is politicians do what's best for them, right?
Yep.
And what's best for them is to get reelected. And all things being equal on an issue no one cares about, if they can do what some donor wants, great, because the money helps to get reelected. But all of a sudden, I'm getting 5,000 of your constituents weighing in, and you're like, I don't care if Taxi gave me a couple of grand. I'm not going to piss off this many voters. And so they did what we wanted. And it was like, oh, and it was sort of 2 realizations. One, it kind of confirmed, every policy output is the result of a political input. Every politician makes every decision solely based on the next election and nothing else. And there are exceptions. Mike Bloomberg was obviously one of them, but there are exceptions, right? Yeah. And so 1, that's what makes them tick. And 2, the same people who are weighing in on our behalf were not like regular voters, right? They didn't even know the names of the people we were having them weigh in with. They just liked Uber. And so my question became, okay, when we made it really easy, when we put it on their phone, all of a sudden they did something politically. What if they could vote this way? And the reason why to me that was so important is because we live in a world where gerrymandering effectively means that the only elections that ever really matter are the primaries. And primary turnout's typically around 10 to 15%, sometimes even less. So who are those voters? In Texas, they're the far right. In California or New York, whatever, they're the far left. Or they're special interests that know how to move money and votes in low turnout elections. And so as a result, those groups dictate not only who wins office, but then what happens once they're in office. Yeah. And so we either get the chaos and dysfunction of DC, or we get totally one-sided governments, whether it's the city of San Francisco on the left or the state of Texas on the right. And the reason that's so tragic is, take you and your brother. Even though he's moved more left and you've moved more right, I bet if the 3 of us sat down together and I brought up 20 different issues and offered up kind of a middle ground, I could get you guys there on almost all of them, right? So I agree. Guns. We shouldn't go confiscate everyone who has guns who has one, but it shouldn't be easy to just walk into a store and walk out with an assault weapon, right? Most people would agree on that, but most people don't vote in primaries. So those who do, either say all guns all the time or no guns ever. And as a result, nothing gets done and schools keep getting shot up. Or we had that terrible shooting in, New York last week. Immigration. Most people would say we shouldn't have open borders. You shouldn't just be able to walk into any country you want. But we do need legal immigration. And there are people who might be here illegally, but they're part of the economy and we need them and they should stay, right?
Yeah.
Most people would agree with that, right? But again,
I agree.
They don't vote in the primaries. So there's a solution that we could reach on pretty much everything, but that only works if it is in the interest of the politicians to actually reach a solution. And when the only people they're answering to in their next primary are the extremists, they don't want a solution. They want purity, right? On either side, they're equally bad.
I guess like knowing that information and knowing politics extremely well, I'm trying to think mobile voting from a common sense standpoint makes a lot of sense. Like it's like the gun conversation or immigration, right? But when I start thinking about, okay, who does mobile voting activate and who does that benefit? It probably benefits one party more so than the other.
So what's interesting is, Estonia is the only country in the world that has this.
Okay.
And they've actually had internet voting for 20 years now. Okay. So I was over there about 6 weeks. They invited me to kind of come over and check out their system. So I did. And so in year one, 1.3% of people chose to use the internet to vote and the rest did in person. Okay. Today, the majority of the people vote online because it's easier. And what they've at least found, that I talked to political scientists and all the different people, is early on, it might be that certain types of candidates were benefiting because of who that 1.3% was. But now it's just evenly distributed. And therefore, whoever loses an election always blames mobile voting, no matter what side they're on. Yeah. But fundamentally, it's not that it really has benefited over time any particular party. What it has done is just taken turnout, especially in their local elections, and just consistently made voting a habit for people. And so now in a local election, 50% of people vote, whereas we're at 10 in the US. So yes, I can see a world where in the first couple of years, more Gen Z, which one would argue is better for Democrats, although Gen Z went very heavily for Trump. So I don't even know that that's true, by the way, right? Yeah. So one is, I don't think we actually even know what party would benefit necessarily. I think it's almost going to be more, I think that generation, because I have 2 kids in it, it's candidate based. If somebody appeals to them, that's what they're going to do. So you just have to be the best candidate in whatever way. But over time, I think ultimately it just leads to more people voting. And what that means is that when you're a politician and you want to get reelected, you have to show that you actually got the stuff done that people cared about. And that incentivizes you to then compromise on guns, immigration, climate, healthcare, whatever it is. And that starts to solve our problems.
Yeah, I think that the challenge would be if I'm, incumbent leadership in either party, adding mobile voting could undermine their power because right. So that's your uphill battle.
That is my uphill battle without a doubt. Right. So no question about it. This is hard. I don't want in any way to make it seem like it's not.
Yeah.
But A, it's worthwhile. And B, when you think about every major right in this country that's ever been won, women's right to vote, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, same-sex marriage, whatever it is, the status quo never wanted to do it. And it only happened because enough people stood up loud enough and long enough and demanded their rights. And if you do that enough, eventually the status quo has to give in. And so that's what's going to have to happen here too, which means we're not going to have mobile voting in all elections tomorrow or even in 3 years, right? It's probably a 10-year process. And it's going to take building a massive national grassroots movement. And it's going to be incredibly hard. But I also don't see any other solution to fixing our democracy, because you got to be scalable, and the only way to be scalable is you got to go to where the people are, and that's on their phones.
Yeah, I know. Obviously, it makes complete common sense. I just know, because you made comments about all the people you work with and how difficult and crazy.
Yeah, they're all going to hate it. Yeah.
So when you start thinking about how you actually accomplish something in politics, is it money? Is it sentiment? What actually gets something changed? Because
it's all of it. So here's how I'm at least going about it. We'll see if I'm right. But First is I'm starting local. So I'm only right now trying to legalize mobile voting for municipal elections. So mayor, council, school board, things like that.
Is that at a particular city or a state?
Well, it will be, right? So voting is locally controlled, which is good in a way because it means I'm not stuck with Washington, but it's bad because I got to go city by city, state by state. So it's a lot of work and a lot of money and a lot of effort. But as a result, we've been talking to mayors around the country, and some are like, yeah, this is kind of, you get people who are outliers and anything, right? And so just like when we started doing mobile voting, we funded elections in 7 different states where either deployed military or people with disabilities voted on their phones in real elections. And in those 7 states, we found election officials who really cared about that particular issue and were willing to try something new. So, same thing. We're finding the mayors that are kind of more open. And also, there's a bit of an age correlation, right? Younger politicians are just more comfortable with this.
Is a Miami mayor interested in this, or is he against this?
He doesn't have the power specifically to do it. It's up to the county. I actually had a call today with someone who's close with the county, and they thought maybe tough initially for Miami, but the county has all these other municipalities that have very, very low turnout. And for those, and by the way, I'll take it where I can get it, because my view is once the genie's out of the bottle and we show that it works, they can't put it back in, right? As a VC, which is what I ended up, doing in tech, I invest in tech companies. I look at tech companies every day. I work on legalizing them. So I've worked on and invested in FanDuel, Coinbase, Circle, Roman, Lemonade, Bird, Latch, Alma, a whole bunch of companies. And my view is always, once I can get that tech out there into the bloodstream, whatever opponent we have, the taxi industry, the hotel industry, the casino industry, they can't stop it, right? It may take us some time, but once it's out there, it's going to get done. And so as a result, I'll go anywhere, right? So if you are a mayor or a city council member and you're listening to this podcast and you're like, hey, that sounds interesting, hit me up because I'd love to talk to you. So we've identified a couple of big cities, a bunch of mid-sized cities that are at least genuinely seem interested, having conversations now, trading drafts of legislation, talking to members of the council. My hope would be that I have bills in play in about 6 cities by the end of this year.
Wow.
And then go from there. And we got to build a movement. And by the way, we have to raise a lot of money. So I have funded this thing myself. I've put $20 million of my own money into it so far.
Wow.
And I've done really well. I got super lucky with Uber. My other businesses have done really well. I'm really fortunate. But it's going to take a couple of $100 million to do this. And I don't have a couple of $100 million. So I now need financial partners. I need political partners. I need grassroots partners, and that's why I'm kind of taking this public, whether it's, coming on here or the TED Talk or anything else, because, I can't do this by myself. And by the way, I shouldn't, right? I'm just a random dude. No one asked me to do this. It wasn't like I was Harry Potter born with mark on my head and you shall fix democracy. I just kind of saw something that was a good idea and luckily had the right mix of tech and, experience in tech, experience in politics. I kind of made a lot of money by accident. So I was like, fuck it, I might as well use it for this. And so it's all that's why I'm doing it, but I need all the help I can get.
Yeah, no. And I mean, obviously commend you because I understand people who never worked in politics that go and try to make change because they're naive and, they mean well. So they put their money where their mouth is. How difficult this is. And you're still double down.
Yeah, no matter, I'm not the same gullible, stupid kid I was when I walked to Ed Rendell's office. I get here, I am still doing it. So I'm trying. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for me, in politics today, it is such an impossible thing to navigate as just a regular citizen. I have no involvement in politics, but I'm getting hit with information from news, from social media, from our president, from other elected officials, and I don't know what to believe anymore. I'd rather believe the meme because it's entertaining.
Yep.
So, and so I'm just fuck it. I don't care. I'm just going to vote based on vibes that I feel from the person. And if they're somewhat aligned, I'll go with it. And I know that sounds not intellectual, but that's That's how I feel at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that's how most people vote. In my experience, and I've been at this for a long time now, people don't go into the ballot box with a checklist of 47 issues and 3 spreadsheets. They're like, they have like a gut feeling about the candidates. There's a party that they like more than another or hate less than another. And maybe there's one issue or 2 issues that they're aware of that they know how the candidates feel about it. And that's really it. Yeah. And so that's it. Vibes are a big part of what elects her. Look, we just elected a mayor, at least in the Democratic primary, but he's going to win the general in New York City, who's 33 years old, a socialist, but he won on vibes, and I don't agree with him, but his vibes were great. His campaign was great. So, but with that said, Mondami, do you know how many votes he got?
I have no idea.
132,000. You know what the population of New York City is?
Much more.
8.5 million. So it's 5% of the population.
That's insane.
Because so few people vote, and in New York, we really make it a pain in the ass to vote. The guy who's going to run the city and have a huge impact on all of our lives, or someone like you who comes every week in your life, was only chosen by a fraction of the population. And that's because voting is too hard. Most people I know who live in New York City did not bother to vote, but 100% of them have a phone. And if they could have voted on their phone, a lot of them would have.
Yeah. So you think he's going to win?
Yes. Yeah, he's a Democratic nominee. I mean, it's only like accents of history. Like Mike Bloomberg won because of 9/11, right? Yeah. That scared the shit out of everyone. It shook everything up. It changed it. And then he still barely won. Like it only happens when something really weird happens. So yeah, something like that happened again. That could make it different. But assuming some crazy black swan event doesn't happen, the Democrat's going to win, and he's going to be the mayor.
And you don't think something weird happening, being his policies are pretty extreme? You don't think that's black swan enough?
Because he won. I mean, he wasn't hiding his views. A little bit like Trump. Like, there's a lot about Trump I don't like, but like, he's doing what he said he was going to do. What he's doing, it's not a surprise, right? Yeah. And like Mondami, same thing. Like, he's very open about what he thinks, and he won a majority of voters, and he's well over 50% in the polls. Yeah. And look, when you think about at least New York City, but I think this is generally true in city governments everywhere, there's 2 things that voters really care about. Is the city clean, safe, and well-run? And can I afford to live there, right? Yeah. And Mondani was very smart in that he really honed in on affordability. And his ideas may not at all be practical, but nonetheless, he was able to outline things like free buses or rent frees or whatever, free childcare that voters really liked. Achieving them is going to be super hard, but he was smart enough to listen to what people were saying. And then it came up with ideas that met those concerns.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think the marketing of his campaign was just brilliant. Yeah. I don't agree with I think almost anything he says. Yeah. And but I get why he resonated with voters and young people, and he crushed it on TikTok and totally. So I get that piece. And I think what's interesting is that like I see like the reaction to him winning, but like if the reaction is actually that case, you should see it in the ballots. Right. And so, and to your point that like more than likely, even though this will dramatically change daily life in New York City, more than likely no one's going to actually vote because no one gives a shit.
Yeah. I mean, people just, look, we had, again, if we had mobile voting, different story, different ball game. Also, the problem is the people running against him are all thoroughly unlikable. People like Andrew Cuomo. Yeah. There's 3 of them, so they're all going to split the anti-Mondani vote. And so as a result, he wins. And I think at this point, for someone like me who lives in New York City, loves New York City, raises my kids in New York City, I own businesses in New York City, if he's going to be mayor, even though I don't agree with him on much of anything, if he's willing to take advice, like I'm happy to do whatever I can to help him succeed because I love the city. So like when I think about why Mike Bloomberg was such a good mayor, it's not that Mike's the smartest guy. He might be the smartest guy. That's true. But it's that he just said, I want the most talented people I can get. And I don't give a shit about anything but talent. And thousands of people like you and me showed up, or like in my case, me or Anish, right? Like ended up working in and around the Bloomberg world. And then he let us do stuff, right? Like campaign promises or whatever. And so like good things happen. And the truth is, there are tons of smart, non-political people who would love to be the parks commissioner of New York City or the sanitation commissioner or whatever it is. If Zoran wants to hire people based on talent, he could still be an effective mayor. If everything is about the workers' paradise, then it's going to be a disaster.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's super fascinating what's happening. And I think like, you know, to your point around Trump, he said a lot of crazy things, but he's doing them. And some people agree with some of the things and some people don't. And one of the topics that actually came up that I was reading about this morning was they wanted to have a bond listed for people that are visiting. And in some cases from certain countries, up to $15,000 to get a tourist visa. And so I was like, I first like scoffed at it. I'm like, stupid. And then I read that in 2023, 500,000 people overstayed their visa.
Yeah.
Which,
totally.
Which is like kind of crazy because I would never go to a country where I have a visa. Like in China, if I overstayed my visa, I'm going to jail.
You're going to jail. They're going to kill you.
There's nothing to say. So like, what do you think about some of these policies?
I kind of had the same reaction you did. I hadn't heard about it till this morning. We probably read the same articles. And my initial thought was like, that seems unfair. And then I was like, look, there's all kinds of things in the world, whether it's bail or security deposits or anything else where like, in order to do what you promised to do, they extract an economic cost out of you and you get that cost back when you fulfill your promise. It's not an unusual thing in society, right?
Yeah.
And so I get that maybe if it's only applied to some countries, it's discriminatory in some ways. But at the same time, if there are people from some countries that are overstaying at a much greater rate than others, that's not an unreasonable basis on which to apply it. So it was one of those things that like at first blush, I'm like, no. And then the more I thought about it, I'm like, maybe there's some logic to it.
Yeah. And I think when I look at a lot of the Trump ideas, the message is actually pretty spot on. It's just the messenger comes off really bad.
I think, and to me at least, it's the application, right? Well, like take tariffs.
Yeah.
He is absolutely right that there are American industries and businesses that are discriminated against by other countries.
Yes.
He's absolutely right to stand up for them. How that then resulted in, 15 to 30% of most of the world, as of today, 50% on India, all this other stuff, like A doesn't equal B, right? Like in order to protect those industries or countries, we should have imposed retaliatory tariffs to do so. But to me, to now make American consumers pay 20, 30, 40% more at Target or Walmart for everything doesn't really make sense, right? Took it too far. Or like securing the border. He is right to secure the border. A sovereign nation has to have secure borders. You're not a country otherwise. But does that mean you start rounding up people who are U.S. citizens and just deporting them out due process? No, right? Like underlying idea, something there. Application, way too broad.
Yeah. And so when you think about like the tariff conversation, what is the mechanism that you think the U.S. government could enact that gives some protection to U.S. businesses? Like, what do you think it is that like would be different than a tariff?
Yeah. I mean, I think, first of all, I think you could just do tariffs on a much more case-by-case basis. But if you weren't going to do that, you could say for industries that are discriminated against, we're going to give you tax credits. We're going to give you grants. We're going to give you R&D money. At the end of the day, look, you run a business, I run a business, like P has to be greater than L. And there's a lot of ways to get there, right? Every business I've ever invested in or worked on, the way you end up making money is not the way you thought you were going to when you started the company, right? 100%. Things are always totally different. So one way to do it would be to impose tariffs. You could even distribute the tariff revenue back to those companies, right, as a payout of some kind. Or if there was an economic reason why you didn't want to impose tariffs because you said there's a greater geopolitical basis here that's just more important than this particular thing, you could say, okay, to whatever industry it is, like, all right, we get it. It's not fair. we'll compensate you. And as long as they're getting compensated economically and P is greater than L, they're okay, right? So there are ways to do it. And I would say, I really, Trump does some stuff, like you said, that like the message is right and the instinct is right. But then there's some stuff that scares the shit out of me. And I'm not talking about like, I don't like the rule of law stuff, but I just think about like what makes the US economy really unique. We have independent markets. We have, independent, honest, economic data, an independent Fed. We have free trade. We have research and development. We invest in higher education. We allow intellectual property. And most important, we take the best people from all over the world and bring them in to then do good things, right?
Yep.
And that's the basis for our success. And Trump is kind of undermining all of those things. And I don't really get it. Like if you love America, the way we survive is by being economically strong. And I feel like we're taking a lot of our competitive advantages and we're undermining them. And we're just like committing harikari. Like I don't get it.
So I agree with you because there is a lot of disruption in the economy and the way things are going about. I think what's the most fascinating thing about Trump and the broader cabinet is they're actually questioning things that like for a long time, no one ever questioned.
Yep.
And so that element of it, I really, really like. And like, I know last week, he wanted to fire the Bureau of Labor Statistics woman and say, for whatever reason, my instinct, I've been a business owner for 25 years. I have I'm in retail. I have a very good pulse on what's happening in retail from a sales standpoint.
Yeah.
So when I see consumer spending data, CPI data, unemployment data, it doesn't feel right. It feels directionally wrong. And
interesting.
And then when I see job revisions happening every month, a lot of it's due to the fact they said the way that it's calculated, the data points they use and the sample size. And so more than me saying like, oh, fire the person, I would question being like, can we be collecting this data a little bit better? Because a downward job revision, like what happened the last week it really might have changed Jerome Powell's Fed
decision.
meeting.
Yeah.
Right. And instead they're on pause till September and we might not get an interest rate cut then because as far as he's concerned, the data he looks at says economy is really strong.
Right. Yeah. The data has to be independent and accurate so that investors can use it to make decisions. And either way, if the data that they're collecting is inaccurate, that's a problem. If you're firing someone because politically you don't like what the data says for you, that's a problem, right?
100%.
You just need, in fact, I'll take it a step further. To me, the best way to set immigration targets is not like political compromise. It's just go to the Department of Labor and the Fed and Treasury and say, where do we need workers, right? What industries? Yeah. Hospitality, great. Construction, fine. Nursing. And then just say, okay, we're going to take in this many people who have this skill set into the country. And that could be 1 million way, or it could be 5 million another year. But like, there's such a rational way you could do all of this.
Do you think there is a group of people or a person that Trump listens to, or he's just batshit crazy and does whatever he wants?
No, I mean, I think that he talks to a lot of people, and I think he sort of gathers lots of opinions, and then something kind of clicks for him. And some of it is what he's hearing from his friends, some of it what he's seeing on TV, some of it's what he's seeing online, some of it is what his personal beliefs are, some of it what he thinks his personal well-being will be going forward. And the amalgamation of all of that then leads to a choice. I will say he's much more governed by id than most people, right? Like his emotions have a lot more to do with how he makes choices than usually like the US president might, right? So, that's a different approach to it. His instincts, though, sometimes are excellent, right? So it's complicated because, a lot of views he has or conclusions he reaches, I don't agree with. But then there are times where he seems to have an innate understanding of human nature where you're like, yeah, that's probably right. So he is really, really complicated. Overall, I think he's doing more harm than good. But I think to your point, like take Doge, right? I loved Doge when it was created because I was like, great, I worked in government. I know we need this. So when I was deputy governor in Illinois, we cut the workforce by 20%. And we did it because we had a huge budget deficit and we didn't want to raise taxes. And we said, we're going to cut the deficit and we're going to do it without cutting funding for education, healthcare, or public safety. And what we did was just everyone that retired, left, whatever, we never replaced anyone. We did early buyouts and we were able to get the workforce down by 20%. And guess what the reduction was in services? Nothing. It was fine, right?
Yeah, there's that much bloat. Yeah.
Yes. So they could have gone about it in a way that I think really could have worked. So, for example, if you told me that 40% of the middle management at the post office should be gone, great. Should we be firing nuclear scientists and the people who do the National Weather Service to do flood alerts? No, right? Or to me, the other big opportunity that they just didn't take, I guess, because Elon and Trump fell out, was there's so many ways to use tech to make government do better, right? AI, procurement. If you think about it, by definition, when the government buys a couple $1 trillion a year worth of stuff, all governments, and it's human beings, and even if they're not corrupt, they're human. They have envy, loyalties, feelings, jealousies, biases. It's just, they're human beings, right? You don't need that. AI could say, put out the RFP. It could say, here's the world of bidders we should select from. They could reach a much bigger group of that. And then it can make decisions. You can still have a human being review it or whatever it is, but it would save so much time, so much money, be so much more honest. And there's so many ways to use technology to do the work of government better that, to me, Doge had two great promises or potential. One, to get rid of a lot of bloat. And two, to really modernize the government.
Yeah.
And, I know Elon and Trump don't get along now, but I'd love someone to still be in charge of the modernization part because, we really need it. And by the way, I know this is my day job as a VC. The tech exists to do it. It's not like a 100%. Fantasy. The software's there.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, government efficiency using technology probably closes the deficit faster than anything.
Yeah. Yeah. You could do it. And by the way, also gives people more faith in their government, right? Trust in government is at an all-time low because people are rightfully cynical. And I don't blame them because they don't think government is looking out for them. They don't think government is effective. One of the ways you can make it more effective is what we talked about with mobile voting, which is give politicians the incentives to work together again and get shit done. Another way to do it would be what you just said, which is run the actual government better, right?
Yeah.
And, that the use of technology would go a really long way towards that.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. One other topic I wanted to touch on is, and I want to know what's your opinion on this. So Stephen Colbert got let go to shut down his show. Some people say it's political. Other people say it's just a business decision. Howard Stern show got canceled. I was a diehard Howard Stern listener as a high school and college student. And then I stopped being in the car for a long time. So I stopped listening. And I know that of late, he's also gone more left and, maybe alienated some audience or is serious as why are we paying this guy $100 million a year? Not a good business decision. Do you think the shift that's happening in media is driven by any ounce of politics or is it driven just purely by economics?
Generally economics. So I'm not inside of Paramount. I don't know what happened. But if you ask me, is it more likely that Colbert got canceled because they wanted FTC approval for the Ellison purchase of Paramount, or more likely because the guy was losing $30 million a year? I think it's more likely he was losing $30 million a year. It might be that they knew they needed to do it, and then this was the right time to do it because it had an added benefit politically. I could totally see that. But fundamentally, look, media is a really, really tough business, and it has gone through massive sort of transformation and disruption. Think about this conversation, right? So 30, 40 years ago, media was totally mainstream. It was Howard Stern, it was the late night shows, it was the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, it was ABC News, and now it is creators, YouTubers, Substackers, influencers, podcasters. And you know what? If that is the form of media that people want to consume, fine, right? Economies, viewers, everything changes and modernizes. And like in a lot of ways, like it's far more democratic, than just having a handful of people control all of the medium of it. Look, all of those things in many ways. So for someone like me, who a lot of my time is spent trying to pass legislation of some kind, right? Now, like, I don't need the New York Times necessarily in order to pass a bill. If you said to me, you could have a Wall Street Journal editorial supporting your position or a Joe Rogan podcast, I take Rogan 100 times out of 100, right?
Yeah.
So like the democratization of media and the sort of disaggregation of it, to me, has had a lot of tremendous benefits. And if as a result, Howard Stern or Stephen Colbert or someone else goes away, like, all right, things change.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, one last question.
Yeah.
You're a rich guy. You got to place a bet. Let's say $1 million. You have to place a bet on who the next president of the United States is going to be. Who would you bet?
I'm going to take a kind of a cop out here, but I'll do it. So let's pretend this was Polly Market or something.
Okay.
And I'll put the $1 million on the generic Democratic candidate. And here's why.
Wow.
So I don't know who it is. And I kind of, if anything, you saw that Wall Street Journal poll last weekend had the Democrats at 33-65.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder if any of them are likable. But putting that aside, I believe, generally speaking, we are in an era of one-term office holders, because to run for office by definition is to say everything is fucked up and I'm the one that can fix it. And then when you're in there, because the system itself is so fucked up, you can't really fix it. And then a couple years later, you go back and say, well, give me another chance. And the voters say, screw you. You told us you were going to fix it. You didn't do it. We're going the other way, right? So we had, Trump's Republican and Biden's Democrat. Trump is a Republican. And I just think these things are in Congress, New York City, like these things are just going to keep bouncing around because people are so unhappy and so frustrated. And so I think purely for that reason, I would put the $1 million on the Democrat without even knowing who it's going to be.
So you're going to take the field, being the
I'm going to take the Democratic field solely based on a bet on societal unhappiness.
Okay. I like it. Hot take. If people want to find out more about what you're doing and want to connect with you, how do they do that?
Yeah, a couple of ways to do it. So if you want to connect with me, LinkedIn is a great way to do it. That's the best way to do it. There's a lot of propaganda on bradleytusk.com. So if you go there, there's all kinds of nice articles about me and shit like that. If you're interested in mobile voting, if you go to mobilevoting.org, you can sign up to get involved in it. And then also there's lots of ways to follow our work. I have a podcast called Firewall. I have a Substack that's free that you can subscribe to. I've written a couple of books that you could take out of the library or read or something like that. So I write a column for the New York Daily News. So, if the kind of things we just talked about are things that you find interesting, there's lots of ways to hear more.
Amazing.
Let me ask you a quick question. So when you're in New York, do you ever record from there?
Sometimes. The problem is I usually have like pretty shitty internet connection. So that's the reason why I don't.
For you.
Okay.
I own a podcast studio.
No way.
You can have it for free.
Now we can record in New York. Where is it?
Yeah. So it's on the Lower East Side. So I own a bookstore on the Lower East Side.
What streets?
It's on Orchard between Houston and Stanton, 180 Orchard.
Great. I know exactly where it is.
And it's a bookstore, it's a podcast studio, it's an event space. But you guys could even do a lot of podcasts, like live events there with the audience, and a cafe. Total terrible business. I lose tons of money, but I really enjoy it. And the studio is free for anyone to use. So anyone listening to, by the way, if you're in New York or you're in New York, go to ptnetwork.com and you can just sign up and use our studio for free. But especially you all you got to do is just email or text me and say, hey, is it possible next Tuesday at 12? I'm sure. And, but it's a professional, real studio. So, you should use it.
Oh, that's great. I usually stay in the Lower East Side, so it's perfect. Amazing. Thank you so much, Bradley. This was incredible.
This was great.
Yeah. And thanks, Anish, to introduce us, who also listens to the pod. So I appreciate that. And I look forward to watching the journey on mobile voting. I would love a catch up in a few months to see how progress is going too.
Anytime. This was super fun.
Yeah. We'll do it
at my studio.
Oh yeah, we'll do it. Yeah. Perfect.
Cool.